Hi, this is Phil Shapiro. I finished reading this really interesting new book, Becoming an Ally to the Gender Expansive Child, a guide for parents and carers by Anna Bianchi. And this book showed up on the new bookshelf in the public library where I work, and I am so grateful to the person who asked the library to buy it, because this book has made me a better person. It's opened up my mind in beneficial and caring ways. So this is from the flap, the inside flap of the book. When Anna Bianchi's grandchild asked, "Nanny, you do know I'm a girl, don't you?" Anna recognized this as a pivotal and daunting moment in their relationship. She knew that to answer her grandchild, who had been assigned male at birth, her own attitudes and assumptions and beliefs about gender would need to be examined first. With reassuring honesty and openness, Anna draws on her own experience, current research, and interviews with children and their families. She shows how the inner journey of the adult inevitably impacts on the outer journey of the child, and given the significance of this, offers a step-by-step guide to becoming an ally to the gender-expansive child. Here's Anna Bianchi, has a background in social work, personal development training, and facilitation work. Here are some of the testimonials about the book. I felt I needed to include these. This book should be essential reading for anyone who looks after or works with children and young people. It would also be really useful reading for anyone working or interested in the fields of equality and diversities. So that's from Berkeley Wild, director of the Diversity Trust. And I cannot recommend this book enough, is the end of that testimonial. Anna Bianchi, in her empathy and wisdom as a grandmother and as a scholar, goes deep and wide. And that's from Diane Aaron Saft, Director of Mental Health, Child and Adolescent Gender Center, and author of The Gender Creative Child and Gender Born, Gender Made. As a young trans person who is currently transitioning, I feel that books like this are vital in helping people support and understand those in the trans community, and that's by Nia. Library Journal says, in this powerful offering, the author weaves a combination of biography and parental advice into the important topics of safety, labels, bigotry, and forgiveness. Enthusiastically recommended for growing collections on transgender youth. Thank you, Library Journal. So this is a quote from the book. I had no premonition when my grandchild was born that I would be writing this book. How could I know that Ruben's birth would lead me to question many of my essential truths about being male or female? That his small, fierce journey across the landscape of gender would take me on one of my own journeys? That Ruben's insistence on living his own truth would inspire me to live mine more fully? None of us knew then that my grandson, soon to be celebrated in every hue of blue, would undo our gender bearings. These were impossible circumstances to imagine the morning Reuben arrived. I simply held him to my heart and gazed into his face as surely in love as I ever been in the whole of my life. By the time our boy was 3, his preference for toys, games, clothes, and activities began to all go against the gender grain. At first it was subtle, choosing a pink lunchbox, wanted to wear slides in his hair, refusing to wear a navy dressing gown. 6 months or so later, Reuben seemed to have crossed over some internal divide, and to our great consternation began to declare his identity as a girl. At 4, Reuben's clarity about his own gender path was apparent to anyone that knew him. And then it goes on. I love this part. It's a very interesting part of the book. The grandson, 4 years old. Nanny, you do know I'm a girl, don't you? I remember feeling my stomach lurch and being utterly disarmed by my grandson's trust, his unflinching inquiry, and the clarity in his solemn brown eyes as they studied mine. For a moment in time, I stood in the center of a bridge spanning 2 different shores, with my thoughts manhandling each other out of the way. I looked in one direction toward the safety of a gender harbor I recognized and understood. Then I followed Reuben's view towards the other shore, and a coastline I couldn't read at the distance. I was standing from it. Nothing truly in my experience had prepared me for this. Not my parenting of 4 birth children and a stepson. I knew in my bones as Reuben waited for my answer, I was being confronted with two stark choices: influence my grandchild to deny his own reality, or dare myself to redefine my own. So now, if this question would have been asked 10 or 20 or 30 years ago in the United States or another country, if there was a grandson who told a grandparent, "Do you know I'm a girl, don't you?" A grandparent potentially might say, "Shut up, you don't know what you're talking about, don't be silly." But this particular grandparent understood that this was this was an important communication happening between a grandchild and a grandparent. And not to be denied, not to be, in fact, this book really helps all human beings in society understand that we need to keep a more open mind on matters of gender. And myself, working in a public library, I'm trying to find better words to use when I talk about children, when I'm talking with parents or grandchild. Instead of saying your son or your daughter, I just say your child. So it's it doesn't really matter whether they're a son or a daughter. It just matters that they're part of our community. So I'm forcing myself to try and be more inclusive. The path of an ally. It takes courage to challenge oneself, to deliberately set out on a passage of self-discovery with no promise of comfort. To set out, in fact, anticipating effort and endurance, confusing terrain, steep gradients, and a dwindling sense of certainty. The motivation for embarking on such a journey in the first place must be compelling, and the reasons for doing so big enough to overcome any fears it provokes. For many of you turning these pages now, that reason is to do with love. You may be a parent who fears the wrong decision could devastate your child's social or emotional well-being, a foster carer who thinks gender-expansive behavior is bad, and you're now conflicted about your role, or a grandparent who is embarrassed by your granddaughter's preference and feels guilty of this. So, the second critical thing you need to bring into the process is willingness. The usefulness of this book hinges on your willingness to use reflexive thinking. By this, I mean exercising your ability to reflect on your attitudes, values, and behavior. This means cultivating the capacity to step back inside yourself and to think and feel through your experiences honestly. It'll mean asking some searching questions of yourself, practicing being open, and promising not to hide behind a well-rehearsed defense. And then this is towards the end of the book. Very powerful thinking. The world is changing. It always has. Nothing stands still, and gender is no exception. The gender matrix constructed on the binary is beginning to crumble. The rock face that gave rise to it has all along been shape-shifting, as wave after wave of activism has been washing up against it. Now a new gender landscape is emerging we have good reason to trust in the future. Well, when the cultural tectonic plates shifted in the 1960s, the existing template of gender fell between them. This created new freedom for many people who previously had been denied. So this book is a book of great compassion. Great compassion. I really applaud the author and the publisher and the grandchild. I applied all three of those. The gender matrix. We've been taught that gender is locked, enduring, only exists as two categories. Every person on the planet must fit into one they were assigned to at birth or face the consequences of not doing so. This is what I call the gender matrix. So anyway, what a very, very interesting book. I highly recommend it for every public library, every school library. I recommend it for social workers. I recommend it for psychotherapists. This is a book that's a really important book. It's like it's the book I hope somebody's going to discover in a little free library. I made this screencast for those who are interested. I use this free software called Simple Screen Recorder. I have a Lenovo T410 laptop. I use Linux Mint. My audio is recorded to an Olympus digital audio recorder. And here's my contact information for those who might want to contact me. There's my email, my Twitter, and my YouTube account. If you want to support my book reviews, I have a Patreon page. It looks like this. You can send $1 or $2 a month. Here's my Patreon page. So Patreon is a way of supporting people who create useful information, because YouTube is very poor at helping compensate creators. YouTube does a very poor job of that. And so Jack Conte set up a website called patreon.com, and this is a much better way for people to show their appreciation for people who are. And that's it. This is Phil Shapiro. Hope you find some value in that book review, and please tell other people about this excellent book.